that the federal law would apply in this case. Now, the question of whether or not there is an interrogation would be the main issue, and the individual is still under investigation to determine whether or not there was sufficient cause for him to be arrested.
But that isn't what the officer has testified to. The officer testified that he was trying to determine whether he was under the influence of alcohol or under the influence of drugs. And so therefore, my interpretation of the testimony that we've had so far is that he had made a determination that he had, in fact, violated Vehicle Code Section 23152. It was just a question whether that was as a result of alcohol or drugs.
Your Honor, I didn't read the question the same way. May I ask another question of the officer?
Go ahead.
Officer, had you made a decision at the point where you asked questions of the defendant, had you made a decision whether or not he in fact was in violation of any vehicle code or any other criminal section?
I had made the decision that I was going to investigate further. I felt that he was probably under the influence of one or the other at that point. I had not made a determination of what he was under the influence of.
I would submit it.
All right. The objection is sustained. The motion to strike is granted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
At the point where you made the observations, what did you do then?
At that point, I advised radio that I needed help from another unit. I'm a canine officer and not allowed to transport, and so after asking these questions, I determined that I was in fact going to transport the individual down to the jail for violation of 23-152 and called radio and advised that I needed another car to transport.
Officer, assuming that you had not received any response to the questions that you asked, or assuming that the individual said that he did not smoke PCP, would you have let him go?
No, sir, I would have administered more tests, and based on those tests, made the determination at a later date.
What tests would those have been?
I would have given him a balance test, walking the line test, finger dexterity test.
Getting back to the point prior to the time when you asked the questions prior to that time, did you believe that you had reasonable cause to arrest the defendant for driving under the influence?
Yes, sir, I did.
Based on what objective facts?
Based on his very slow and deliberate movements, the staring that he did, and the vertical and horizontal nystagmus.
Did the driving indications have any?
Yes, and the driving indications.
Now, at the point when you called the other car, did you have any further contact with the individual in this case?
I just stood there with him while the other unit arrived. We might have made small talk, I don't remember.
Did you go to the pre-processing center?
No, sir, I did not.
Officer, how long have you been a police officer for the city of San Jose?
7 years.
Prior to that, did you have any other law enforcement experience?
Yes, sir, I was a police officer in the city of Newport Beach for just over 2 years, and a reserve police officer in the city of Corona for 2 years.
Corona is in Riverside County,
As in Riverside County.
not as in Orange County.
Right.
And as a police officer, have you had any previous academy training as part of your background?
Yes, sir, I have.
What is the extent of your academy training?
I had academy training in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Police Academy when I worked for Newport Beach, and the academy training for the city of San Jose.
Okay, what is the extent of your background and training in determining the symptoms of PCP?
Do you mean the amount of training that I have had?
Yes.
We studied it. We had classes in it at the San Jose Police Academy. We had a 40-hour class on various drugs, and one of those drugs that we studied was PCP. There is also a 40-hour class on PCP that I took, put on by the University of Southern California.
And any others?
No other schools of training, no.
As part of your experience, have you made arrests for people that you suspected to be under the influence of PCP?
Yes, sir, I have.
And how many cases approximately have you been involved in?
25 to 30.
And in those cases, did you have occasion to observe the symptoms of being under the influence of PCP?
Yes, sir, I did.
And were you able to find out the results of those cases where tests were given?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to correlate your observations with the test results?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, what was that correlation?
The correlation was that the slow speech, the staring, the nystagmus, all are representative of being under the influence of PCP.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that the officer be qualified as an expert in the symptoms of being under the influence of PCP.
Mr. Davila, do you wish to voir dire?
Briefly, if I may.
Proceed.
Officer, you've indicated to us that you took a class at the Department of Justice, I believe,
Yes, sir.
on drugs?
Yes, sir.
Approximately how many hours of that class was devoted specifically to PCP?
It was a 40-hour class, and I believe 1 full day and 8-hour day was on PCP.
Now, you've indicated you also attended a 40-hour class that was on PCP alone. Was that a seminar at USC?
It was a seminar, and I believe it was sponsored by USC or UCLA doctors. I'm not sure whether it was sponsored by the Department of Justice. It was here in San Jose. It was a 40-hour seminar.
Was that put on through the medical school at the University of Southern California?
I don't know. It was a class I signed up for through our training unit.
And did the class cover symptoms of PCP?
Yes, sir, it did.
Approximately how much of the class covered that specific area?
Between the different movies that we saw and the lectures that we had, probably close to a full day of it.
8 hours?
Yes.
Did you have any classes in physiology, college classes in physiology?
No, sir.
Any classes in pharmacology?
No, sir.
Any medical background at all?
No, sir.
Any biology background?
Just the classes I took in college.
What classes were those?
Basic biology, chemistry,
What chemistry classes did you take?
just a basic chemistry class.
What type of education did you have, sir?
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in public administration.
Sir, the 25 to 30 arrests that you've made, did you keep records for your own use or other use that would indicate a correlation between arrests you've made and actual convictions for under the influence of PCP?
No, sir.
Thank you. Nothing further.
The officer will be so qualified. You may proceed, counsel.
Based on your observations of the defendant the day of the incident, did you form an opinion as to whether or not the defendant was under the influence of PCP?
Yes, sir, I did.
What is your opinion?
He was under the influence of PCP.
No further questions of this witness.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
I am defense attorney Mr. Giusti, Giusti, Giusti.
I am the court.
I am the witness.
I'm for the plaintiff, Mr. Clark, CLARK.
Okay, starts with Marge in the court.
Edward Rollins.
Gerald Giusti appearing on behalf of and with Mr. Rollins, who is present in court.
Steve Clark for the people. At this time, we would ask that Mr. Shaw from the District Attorney's Office be designated the investigating officer.
We are going to ask that witnesses be excluded.
All your witnesses except for the investigating officer and your first witness are ordered excluded from the courtroom and directed not to discuss their testimony with each other until this court rules.
The people waive opening statement. People call Miss Dawn.
You waive opening statement.
I waive an opening statement.
I waive an opening statement also.
Be seated in the witness stand, please. Will you please speak clearly into it? Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Julia Donn, D-O-N-N.
Miss Dawn, how old are you?
I'm 17.
And where were you working on July 10, 1987?
The ice cream and dessert company in Valka Village in Carpentino.
Prior to July 10, were you a victim in a crime that is pending in Santa Clara County?
Yes.
And on July 10, were you interviewed by a Mr. Ed Fernandez in the District Attorney's Office?
Yes.
What time did you discuss the felony that happened prior to the July 10th interview?
It was between 9:30 and 10.
Where did the interview take place?
In the store.
How long did you speak with Mr. Fernandez?
Maybe for 15 or 20 minutes.
After Mr. Fernandez left, did someone else approach you regarding the case that you were involved in?
Yes.
And if you can, describe the first time that you saw that person approach you and what happened.
He came into the store and I was behind the counter. He told me that he was so-and-so from the district attorney's office.
Now, was that the same day that you talked to Mr. Fernandez?
Yes.
How long after Mr. Fernandez left did you speak with the gentleman?
Maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours after.
Is the person that came in and talked to you about the case in this courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you point him out to the court and describe him?
He's sitting there and wearing a beige jacket and striped tie.
What did she say? I missed the first part.
I would ask for an in-court identification of the defendant.
The record will so reflect.
What did the defendant say to you when he came into your place of employment?
His name, and then he said he was from the district attorney's office.
Are you sure that he didn't say, "I'm a private investigator"?
I'm positive he did not say that.
What did you say, if anything, in response to his statement that he was from the district attorney's office?
I didn't say anything, but I looked over at my boss. I motioned to her to come out and talk to him
Why did you do that?
because I didn't think he was from the district attorney's office because Ed Fernandez in the district attorney's office had not told me that he was going to send anyone over.
Did he give you any identification, I mean a badge or a card?
No.
Who is your boss?
Cecilia Chang.
Did you have any contact with him in person after that?
No.
How about by phone? Did you have any contact with someone who identified himself as Mr. Rollins?
Yes, maybe a week or two after. I'm not sure.
Do you recall how he identified himself at that time?
He just gave his name and said he was a private investigator from the district attorney's office.
Nothing further.
You may cross-examine.
Thank you. Miss Dawn, Mr. Rollins entered your shop sometime before noon on July 10.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Now, as Mr. Rollins entered the shop, he said something to you?
Yes.
He came up to you and he said his name at the very first. He said, "Hello, my name is Mr. Rollins." Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then he said something else, and your testimony is he said, "I'm from the district attorney's office." Is that right?
Right.
Now, you've talked about this with the police officer investigating this matter. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you told him what he said, didn't you?
Yes.
Now, ma'am, when Mr. Rollins said those things to you after he said his name, did he say the exact words, "I'm from the district attorney's office"?
Yes.
In your mind, was that the substance of what he said, or were those the exact words he said?
He said district attorney's office.
Okay. You heard the words attorney's office?
District attorney's office.
I understand that. You heard the words district attorney's office, is that right?
Right.
So what you're telling me are the exact words he said to you. "I'm from the district attorney's office"?
Yes.
And that's not just the effect of the conversation, so to speak?
I object as being vague, Your Honor.
That's not vague.
Are you sure that's what he said?
Yes.
Ma'am, the incident that you were involved with that gave rise to Mr. Fernandez visiting you about an hour before Mr. Rollins arrived, that was an upsetting experience, wasn't it?
Yes.
And something that, by the time Mr. Rollins got there, continued to upset you, didn't it?
No, sir, not really.
But the fact that Mr. Fernandez had spoken with you earlier, had that upset you?
That upset me, yes.
Had you recovered by the time Mr. Rollins had gotten there?
Yes.
You knew that Mr. Fernandez was from the district attorney's office?
Correct.
When Mr. Fernandez got there, did he show you identification?
Yes.
Had he made arrangements with you before to talk with you?
Yes.
When Mr. Rollins came in and said to you words that you heard, "I'm from the district attorney's office," did you say to him, "Show me some identification"?
No.
Did you say to him, "Mr. Fernandez from your office was here earlier, and he didn't tell me you were coming"?
No.
Am I right to say, ma'am, that the whole of your conversation with Mr. Rollins was his introducing himself to you, saying whatever he said to you, and you saying nothing back to him?
Right.
You had no conversation with Mr. Rollins?
He just told me what his name was, where he was from.
And that's the extent of the conversation? He asked no questions of you?
No.
Have you had the opportunity to look at the police officer's report on this matter?
Yes, we went over it, and I was asked questions about it to make sure.
All right, and are you aware of that part of the police report that reflects what Mr. Rollins said to you on July 10th?
Yes.
Is the police report correct as written?
Your Honor, maybe Mr. Juski would like to let the witness review the police report. I don't think she can say whether or not it's correct.
She said she read it today.
I said he asked questions.
It's proper cross-examination.
Ma'am, you told me that you reviewed the police report today, is that right?
Yes, I did not read it.
Ma'am, let me draw your attention to the second page of the police report and the second paragraph, your conversation with the officer. Start with the fourth line down. Would you look at that for me?
All right, I read it.
That says Mr. Rollins walked in and said something to the effect, "Hi, I'm from the district attorney's office. Is that right?
He said, I'm from the district attorney's office.
Did he use those exact words, or did he use some other words that led you to believe he was from the district attorney's office?
I believe he said those words.
Did you ever see a card, a business card from Mr. Rollins?
I saw a card, yes.
And who had that card?
Cecilia, my boss.
Did it have Mr. Rollins' name on it?
Yes.
Did it say he was from the district attorney's office?
No.
Did it have writing on it?
Yes.
Did it say who he was a private investigator for?
Yes, but I don't recall who it was.
Now, ma'am, in looking at that card, were you able to draw a conclusion as to whether Mr. Rollins was in fact from the district attorney's office?
I object on relevance grounds.
Read the question.
Let me tell you why it's relevant. It's relevant because what the district attorney is trying to do is take one statement that may or may not have been made by Mr. Rollins and say, this amounts to a representation. What has to be looked at is the totality of the conversation and whether he represented himself as from the district attorney's office or as a private investigator.
Your Honor, the reason I object as to relevance is if it's some time after the representation was made that he's from the district attorney's office.
You are assuming a fact that's an issue, that a representation was in fact made. All we know so far is that the young lady told the investigating officer of this case at one time that she heard something to the effect. Now she is testifying contrary to that representation that she is positive, which indicates to me that there's been something going on in the background of this situation. It's not exactly what's going on, and I'm very interested whether or not she read that card.
If she read it, perhaps we should ask a few more foundation questions. If she read it 2 weeks later, what difference does it make what her inference was at that time?
You can have her on redirect examination.
All right. In reference to the card, ma'am, am I right in saying that you read that card right after Mr. Rollins left the store?
Yes.
Did that business card have the words private investigator on it?
Yes.
Did that business card have the name of an attorney on it?
No.
Do you recall a name, Mr. Jolly, on there?
Yes, in writing.
Did that business card also have the name of another person on there?
Yes, Peter Dill.
And Peter Dill is the defendant in the other case you were involved with?
Yes.
At that point, ma'am, did you understand that Mr. Rollins was in fact a private investigator?
Yes.
At that point in time, did you believe that Mr. Rollins was a member of the district attorney's office?
No.
I have no more questions.
Thank you. Call your next witness.
We call Miss Cheng.
Please state your name. Spell your last name for the record.
Cecilia Chang, Chang.